Welcome back to Fact Crypt, where we delve into the darkest corners of true crime and unsolved mysteries. In today's episode, we examine a case that haunted California for decades, the chilling saga of the Golden State Killer. A man who committed over a dozen murders, nearly 50 rapes, and more than 100 burglaries, evading justice for years. It wasn't until the age of modern forensic science that the truth came to light. Join us as we explore how this ruthless predator was finally unmasked, leading to one of the most shocking arrests in criminal history. The beginning of the nightmare. The Golden State Killer's reign of terror began in the 1970s, but his crimes spanned nearly a decade, leaving a trail of fear and devastation across California. Initially known as the East Area Rapist, he targeted women in the Sacramento area, breaking into their homes at night. His method was meticulous. He would often stalk his victims for days, learning their routines, and carefully planning his attacks. Victims described the attacker as cunning, often entering homes without leaving a trace. He would awaken them in the middle of the night, blinding them with a flashlight before tying them up. His assaults were brutal, and he left behind an eerie sense of dread. For years, the identity of the East Area Rapist remained a mystery, with investigators baffled by his ability to evade capture. The transition to murder. As the 1970s drew to a close, the crimes escalated. The East Area Rapist evolved into the original Night Stalker, expanding his territory beyond Sacramento to other parts of California. His crimes became more violent, and he began killing his victims. The first known murders attributed to him occurred in 1979 when a young couple, Dr. Robert Offerman and Dr. Deborah Manning, were found murdered in their home in Goleta, near Santa Barbara. The escalation in violence marked a turning point in the investigation. The original Night Stalker seemed to grow more brazen with each attack, often taunting law enforcement by calling his victims and their families. These calls, sometimes years after the crimes, only added to the terror he inflicted on his victims and the communities he targeted. The investigation stalls. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, the Golden State Killer remained elusive throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Investigators struggled to connect the dots between the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker due to the geographical spread and differences in the nature of the crimes. It wasn't until DNA technology advanced that investigators could link the two crime sprees to a single perpetrator. In the early 2000s, a series of breakthroughs in forensic science allowed detectives to use DNA evidence to connect the rapes and murders across California. However, despite having a DNA profile, the identity of the killer remained unknown. The case went cold, and many feared the killer would never be caught. The breakthrough, DNA and genealogy. The turning point came in 2018 when investigators turned to a novel approach in forensic science, genetic genealogy. By uploading the DNA profile from the crime scenes to an open-source genealogy website, detectives were able to build a family tree of the killer's relatives. This painstaking process led them to a former police officer named Joseph James DeAngelo, a man living quietly in a Sacramento suburb. DeAngelo had never been a suspect during the original investigations. His background as a police officer, combined with his ability to remain unnoticed for decades, made him the perfect criminal in many ways. However, once his DNA was obtained and matched to the crime scenes, there was no doubt Joseph DeAngelo was the Golden State Killer. The arrest and confession. On April 24, 2018, Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested at his home. The news of his capture sent shockwaves across the country, especially among the survivors and families of his victims who had lived in fear for so long. DeAngelo's arrest marked the end of a decades-long manhunt and the beginning of the process of seeking justice. In the years following his arrest, DeAngelo confessed to many of the crimes attributed to the Golden State Killer, although he offered little in the way of explanation. He would later plead guilty to 13 counts of murder and numerous other charges to avoid the death penalty, finally bringing closure to some of the darkest chapters in California's criminal history. The legacy of the Golden State Killer. The case of the Golden State Killer is notable not only for the horrific nature of the crimes but also for the way it transformed law enforcement's use of technology in solving cold cases. The success of genetic genealogy in identifying DeAngelo has inspired a wave of new investigations using similar methods, offering hope to victims of unsolved crimes. Moreover, the case highlighted the persistence and dedication of the investigators, many of whom had worked the case for decades. The story of the Golden State Killer is a reminder that justice can be delayed but not denied, even in the most challenging cases. Psychological profile of DeAngelo. Understanding the mind of Joseph James DeAngelo has been a complex task for criminologists and psychologists. DeAngelo's history as a former police officer, his methodical approach to his crimes, and his ability to blend into suburban life for decades have raised many questions about his psychological profile. Experts believe that DeAngelo's criminal activities may have been driven by deep-seated anger, possibly stemming from personal failures and frustrations. His need to exert control over his victims, his meticulous planning, and his escalation from burglary to rape and murder suggest a highly organized offender with a compulsive need for dominance. DeAngelo's dual life as a family man and a violent criminal also highlights the phenomenon of the double life, where an individual compartmentalizes their actions to maintain a facade of normalcy. This ability to switch between roles likely contributed to his ability to evade detection for so long. The impact on victims and their families. The Golden State Killer's reign of terror had a profound and lasting impact on his victims and their families. The trauma inflicted by his crimes has echoed through generations, with many survivors speaking out about the long-term effects of their experiences. For years, these individuals lived with the fear that the man who attacked them was still out there, potentially watching them. The capture and conviction of DeAngelo provided some measure of closure, but the scars remain. Many victims have expressed a mix of relief and lingering anger, knowing that DeAngelo lived a relatively peaceful life for decades while they struggled with the aftermath of his actions. The courage of these survivors in coming forward and their willingness to participate in the legal proceedings against DeAngelo has been a critical part of the story. Their voices were instrumental in ensuring that justice was served, even after so many years. The trial and sentencing. The trial of Joseph James DeAngelo was a significant event in the annals of American criminal justice. In June 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. The plea deal spared him the death penalty, but it ensured that he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearings, survivors and family members of the victims were given the opportunity to address DeAngelo directly. Their powerful and emotional statements highlighted the immense pain and suffering he had caused, but they also demonstrated their strength and resilience. DeAngelo, who had remained largely silent throughout the proceedings, showed little emotion as he was sentenced. The conclusion of the trial marked the end of a long and painful journey for many, bringing a sense of justice that had been elusive for decades. As we conclude our deep dive into the chilling case of the Golden State Killer, we reflect on the profound impact of this story. It's a tale of horror, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. While the crimes of Joseph James DeAngelo will never be forgotten, the courage of the victims and the determination of law enforcement stand as a testament to the power of perseverance. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Fact Crypt. If you found this episode engaging, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of true crime and unsolved mysteries. Have thoughts or theories about the case? Share them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, some mysteries are closer to home than we think.